4:45 a.m., August 26, 2025, Port Everglades, Florida. The harbor is still cloaked in darkness, the only light coming from the sodium lamps reflecting on black water. A faint hum of engines, the grinding gears of forklifts, and the rhythmic thump of pallets hitting the concrete pier break the silence. But this isn't an ordinary shipment. What is being offloaded from the decks of a U.S. Coast Guard cutter is the largest single seizure of cartel narcotics in the service's 234-year history. Wrapped in thick plastic, stacked like concrete bricks, are the dreams of an empire that never reached its buyers. Cocaine, marijuana, and compressed bundles once worth nearly $473 million on the streets of America. The numbers are staggering. 76,140 pounds of narcotics, enough to kill 23 million people if broken into lethal doses, enough to fund hundreds of weapons shipments, to pay thousands of foot soldiers, to bribe entire networks of officials across Central America. And yet, here they are, silent, stacked, guarded by armed sailors. The cartels believed their ocean highway was untouchable, but what they didn't know was that a silent campaign, stretching across thousands of miles of open sea, had been tracking their every move. A campaign known only as Operation Pacific Viper. To understand how these pallets ended up on the docks of Florida, you have to step back, not just days, but months, because the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. And in 2025, the cartels made one. For decades, the Eastern Pacific has been their lifeline. It is the longest and least patrolled highway on Earth, stretching from Colombia's Pacific coast all the way to California. Every year, the cartels pump thousands of tons of narcotics into this corridor, loaded onto speedboats, fishing vessels, and the infamous narco submarines. A narco sub is not the steel leviathan you imagine. They're crude, hand-built in jungle workshops, sheets of fiberglass layered over plywood, painted a dull blue or gray to vanish into the waves. The interior, toxic fumes, unbearable heat, 4 men packed inside with no ventilation and barely any light. But when they surface, they carry up to 10 tons of cocaine, enough to finance entire campaigns of violence across Mexico. The cartels believed they were invisible. They were wrong. In 2025, the United States drew a line. The overdose crisis at home was spiraling. Over 70,000 dead a year from fentanyl and cocaine. Cartel profits were surging, and U.S. intelligence reports showed an alarming rise in maritime trafficking. The answer, Operation Pacific Viper. For the first time, the Coast Guard surged a flotilla of its most advanced cutters into the Eastern Pacific and Caribbean simultaneously. These weren't patrol boats. These were national security cutters like the James and the Hamilton, 418 feet long, bristling with sensors, armed with .50 caliber machine guns, and crewed by 150 sailors each. Floating fortresses designed to patrol the open ocean for months without resupply, and they didn't hunt alone. Overhead, P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft tracked the faintest signals across thousands of miles. Satellites relayed coordinates in real time. Onboard helicopters, MH-65 Dolphins, stood ready to chase down high-speed vessels, and hidden below deck, small boats called RHIBS waited to launch boarding teams armed with M4 carbines, body armor, and night vision gear. This was no random patrol. This was a coordinated strike campaign, built to choke the cartels where they felt most secure, at sea. The cartels never saw it coming. One moment, their boats roared through the waves unchecked, carrying tons of narcotics north. The next, Their engines were locked on radar, their heat signatures tracked from the sky, and their escape routes sealed by cutters lurking just beyond the horizon. And then, when the first go-fast boat appeared, skimming across the Pacific at 50 knots, the hunters moved in. But the smugglers weren't going down without a fight. July 2025. The Pacific Ocean, 300 miles south of Guatemala. The sea is calm, but on the radar of the Coast Guard cutter James, a single shape flickers. At first, it looks like nothing, just background clutter. But within seconds, the operators know this is no fishing vessel. It's moving too fast, too straight, too quiet. The captain leans forward. Contact confirmed. Go fast. Range, 14 nautical miles. A go fast is the Cartel's workhorse. Long, narrow, made of fiberglass. 3 outboard engines at the stern, each capable of pushing the boat to 50 knots. They skim just above the waterline, barely visible to radar, almost impossible to chase. For years, these boats have carried metric tons of cocaine across the Pacific, slipping through the cracks of enforcement. But tonight, their luck runs out. From the deck of the James, alarms blare. The crew surges into motion. A boarding team of 10 sailors grabs rifles, body armor, and night vision goggles. Below, a rigid-hulled inflatable boat, a RHIB, hits the water with a splash, its engines roaring as it speeds toward the contact. Overhead, the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter claws into the night sky. Its crew locks eyes on the fleeing target. The co-pilot calls it out. Visual contact, bearing 212, 3 engines. 4 souls on board down below. The smugglers realize they've been spotted. They throttle up, engines screaming, white spray exploding from their wake. Then they begin dumping cargo. Wrapped bales of cocaine splash into the water, sinking before they can be recovered. But it's too late. The Dolphin swoops low, rotor wash tearing at the waves. A door gunner leans out, gripping an M240 machine gun. He fires a warning burst, glowing tracers stitching the sea in front of the fleeing boat. The smugglers hesitate, then panic. The RHIB slams alongside, boarding team members shouting commands in English and Spanish. Rifles trained, hands in the air. Within minutes, the smugglers are subdued, zip-tied, and hauled back to the cutter. On deck, the evidence is stacked. Cocaine, carefully wrapped in black plastic, each brick marked with cartel logos, crowns, scorpions, even cartoon characters. Symbols meant to track ownership inside the criminal underworld. The haul, thousands of pounds. One boat, one interdiction. But for the cartels, it is only the beginning of disaster. Because Operation Pacific Viper wasn't built for one catch. It was built for many. In the following weeks, the Coast Guard struck again and again. Off the coast of Costa Rica, a second go-fast was intercepted, this time carrying nearly 3 tons of cocaine. 2 days later, another boat was stopped west of Panama. In each case, the same pattern. The smugglers ran, dumped their cargo, but were cornered by helicopters and boarding teams. By mid-July, the numbers were already staggering. Tens of thousands of pounds seized, dozens of crew arrested, millions in cartel profits burned away with every pallet stacked on a U.S. pier. But the cartels weren't finished. They had one card left to play, a weapon far more dangerous than any go-fast. Because in the depths of the Pacific, just below the surface, something else was moving. Not a boat, not a fishing vessel. A semi-submersible narco-submarine, painted blue, silent, designed to vanish into the waves. Inside, 10 tons of cocaine. The Coast Guard had caught go-fasts before. But this would be a fight unlike anything they had seen all year. July 19, 2025. 310 nautical miles south of Guatemala. At first, it looked like nothing, just a faint line across the surface of the ocean, half submerged, leaving almost no wake. But the U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon orbiting high above knew better. Its thermal sensors picked up the heat of diesel engines running below the waterline. The report came back in seconds. Suspect semi-submersible, probable narco submarine. 4 crew. Cargo unknown. For the Coast Guard cutter Hamilton, this was the call they had been waiting for. A narco submarine isn't a true submarine. It's a coffin with an engine, hand-built deep in the Colombian jungle with plywood, fiberglass, and steel pipes. Crude welds, paint peeling, but deadly effective. They ride just below the surface, almost invisible to radar. Inside, 4 to 5 men, sweating in 120-degree heat, surrounded by the toxic stench of diesel fuel. No light, no fresh air. The noise of an engine roaring inches from their heads, hour after hour. Their cargo? Up to 10 tons of cocaine, stacked in waterproof bales. Street value, hundreds of millions. For years, these boats slipped through the cracks. But not today. From the Hamilton 2 RHIBS roar into the water. Boarding teams, helmets on, rifles slung, night vision glowing. Overhead, a Navy MH-60R helicopter circles. Infrared cameras locked onto the faint blue hull cutting through the waves. The smugglers realize they've been spotted. They try their last trick, scuttling the vessel. One man opens the seacock, flooding the hull. Another lights a charge meant to sink the entire sub before the Coast Guard can seize the evidence. But the RHIBS are faster. Sailors pound the fiberglass hull with hammers, forcing the hatch open. Flashbangs are tossed inside. The crew surrenders, coughing, stumbling out of the fumes. Divers are already in the water. They attach pumps, hoses, and inflatable lift bags. The narco sub is stabilized before it can vanish beneath the waves. Its cargo, tons of cocaine, hauled out, brick by brick, stacked on the cutter's deck under armed guard. But this wasn't just another bust, because inside the sub's cargo hold, agents found something unusual. Alongside the cocaine were military-grade satellite phones, encrypted radios, and navigation charts, not just of the Pacific corridor, but of U.S. ports. Evidence that the cartels weren't just shipping drugs. They were planning an expansion. Operation Pacific Viper had just exposed a bigger game, and this was only one vessel. By the end of the summer, multiple semi-submersibles were intercepted, some burned by their crews, others sunk to hide evidence. But in each case, the Coast Guard adapted. Boarding tactics grew sharper, surveillance tighter, coordination with Navy and DEA flawless. Every narco sub that surfaced became a trophy. Every pallet of cocaine pulled from their holds was a message. The ocean is not yours. By late July, the Coast Guard had seized enough narcotics to fill entire warehouses. But the operation wasn't over. There was one final act left to play, the moment the world would see. Because in August, the cutters came home, their decks heavy with seized cargo, their crews exhausted but victorious. And in Port Everglades, under the rising sun, America would witness the largest drug offload in Coast Guard history. August 26, 2025. The long fight across the Pacific is over. The smugglers are in custody. The subs and go-fasts seized or sunk. And now, the final chapter begins. Not at sea, but on American soil. Port Everglades, Florida. At first glance, it looks like just another offload. Forklifts buzzing, cranes lifting pallets, containers rolling onto the pier. But this morning, something is different. This isn't just another shipment. This is history. From the deck of the Coast Guard cutter James, pallets begin to rise, each wrapped in black plastic, each weighing hundreds of pounds, stamped with crude logos, crowns, animals, symbols of cartel ownership. For the cartels, these marks meant profit, reputation, power. But here, under the watch of armed guards, they are meaningless. The forklifts stack them row by row, at first dozens, then hundreds. Soon, the pier itself looks like a battlefield of plastic-wrapped bricks. The numbers: 76,140 pounds of cocaine and marijuana. Street value: $473 million. Enough to flood the streets of Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. Enough to bankroll armies of gunmen, bribe politicians, and fuel the overdose epidemic for months. But not today. Today, those pallets belong to the United States. DEA agents circle the stacks, clipboards in hand, recording every detail. DHS officials watch in silence. Helicopters buzz overhead. Onlookers gather behind the barriers, stunned at the mountain of drugs rising in front of them. For every pallet placed, the silence grows heavier. Because everyone here knows the truth. Each brick is a life saved. Each ton is a community spared. Each pallet is a warning to the cartels. Your ocean highway is no longer yours. Cameras flash as the final pallet touches down. A silent moment follows. No applause, no cheering. Just the sight of Coast Guard sailors, drenched in sweat, standing watch over the largest drug seizure in their service's history. And then the symbolism hits. On one side of the pier, uniforms, flags, weapons, and resolve. On the other, bricks of poison, stacked like monuments to greed. It is not just an offload, it is a confrontation in silence. But the drugs don't stay here. Soon, they will be transported under heavy guard, sealed in convoys, taken to undisclosed facilities. There, they will be incinerated. Billions of dollars turned into ash. And for the cartels, this is a disaster. Months of work erased in a single morning. Smugglers captured, routes compromised, semi-subs exposed. But if the cartels thought this was the end, they were wrong. Because Operation Pacific Viper wasn't just about seizing drugs. It was about sending a message. And that message would echo far beyond Port Everglades, across Mexico, across Colombia, across the entire criminal underworld. Because this wasn't just an operation, this was a declaration. As the last pallet of cocaine rests on the Florida pier, the numbers are announced. 76,000 pounds, $473 million, dozens of interdictions. One name, Operation Pacific Viper. But this is more than a statistic. It's a blow that ripples through the entire cartel empire. For the cartels, the ocean has always been their sanctuary. Vast, silent, impossible to police. In their minds, the Pacific was theirs. A highway stretching from Colombia's jungles to the ports of Mexico, and from there to America's veins. But this operation shattered that illusion. In one summer, the Coast Guard proved it could patrol thousands of miles at once, that it could track the faintest radar blip, the weakest thermal signal, the faint glow of an engine deep below the surface. Every go-fast seized meant less money for weapons. Every narco sub pulled from the sea meant fewer bribes paid to officials. Every pallet of cocaine stacked in Florida meant fewer overdoses in American neighborhoods. And for the smugglers who survived, one truth is now burned into memory. The ocean is not empty. The ocean is watching. This victory wasn't the Coast Guard alone. Intelligence flowed from Colombia. Surveillance aircraft launched from Panama. Navy destroyers lingered just beyond the horizon, and DEA agents followed the trail ashore, dismantling networks cell by cell. Pacific Viper was proof that when nations align, the cartels cannot hide. Not in rivers, not in ports, not even beneath the waves. And yet, amid the figures and the headlines, the real story is simpler. It's the story of a sailor on the deck of the Hamilton, soaked in salt water, dragging bales of cocaine from a sinking narco sub. The story of a boarding team leaping from a RHIB at night, rifles raised, adrenaline spiking, knowing a single mistake could be their last. The story of cutters grinding through months at sea so that drugs meant for Miami never arrive. They don't do it for applause. They don't do it for glory. They do it because the line between safety and chaos runs across the ocean, and they are the ones who stand on it. And that's why the offload at Port Everglades was so striking. No speeches, no fireworks, just silence. Silence broken only by the whine of forklifts and the creak of pallets stacked higher than men. But that silence carried a message. To the cartels, your billion-dollar empire can be erased in a single season. To the American people, your guardians are out there, unseen, undefeated, protecting you while you sleep. To the world, America still controls the seas. This wasn't just the Coast Guard's largest bust. It was a declaration that the overdose crisis will not be ignored, that the cartel's ocean highway will no longer run unchallenged, that every cutter, every sailor, every helicopter crew stands as a wall between chaos and safety. So the next time a narco sub slides into the Pacific, the next time a Go Fast roars across the waves, its crew will wonder, is the ocean empty or is it listening? Because if the Coast Guard is waiting, then their fate is already sealed. Not with speeches, not with negotiations, but with silence, with steel, with resolve. This was Operation Pacific Viper, and this is how the United States answers those who dare challenge its waters.